Hello, we're live for Protospiel Table
Hello.
Talk. We hear
Good
you okay, Jay?
afternoon.
Yes, we do. We do. There
Loud
you
and
are.
clear.
Awesome. Well, today's episode is about action points. So first, we're going to talk about what that means, and some games that we know of that are good examples. And I have a queued up randomized Boardgamizer challenge that involves action points for Jay and Michael.
Yes, I get to see that this time and play it this time.
Hopefully,
We are
we'll
also.
keep it under the limit. Yeah,
I promise to not eat up all our time. I'm also armed and dangerous. I know how to use emotes. I think we understand. I think we understand what cheering means. Look out, Twitch! Here we come.
Right. I've added some things that people can spend their channel points on. So slowly but surely, learning what we can do.
And we'll play our regular game as well later, and let all of you get to know us a little bit better. And I say all of you, I think there's only 1 or 2 people joining or watching right now, but I know that viewer count ticks up as we go. It's always weird to talk to people in plural when there's just like one person.
Right.
So I feel this need to, or this desire to, like, adapt what I'm saying to the size or the engagement of the audience. I don't know if that's better, or if it's better to just pretend that there's 10,000 people there and then
imagine
just let wish fulfillment, right? Yeah. Your actions follow your belief.
It's a packed room. And don't forget, these get archived on the YouTube channel later too. So
that's right.
If you're not watching it right now, they have access to all of these fine episodes, as well as the play sessions that Heather usually holds on Tabletopia most often.
I think it is most often going to be Tabletopia, because that's always been the favored place to put things once they're published.
Yep.
But as time goes on, I think Screen Top and Tabletop Playground are going to grow in popularity, but they haven't already. So a lot of them will be Tabletopia, yeah.
That's a great point, Jay. So this is for posterity, for all of our YouTube viewers, for all of our people going back on Twitch and watching, and for you, person in chat, who's there right now.
It
Let's
might
get
be
started.
Me.
It might be you. It might just be you and me in chat. You have to start somewhere. So what do we want to start with today?
I would like to start with a little pet peeve of mine. So I go to therapy, and I'm really, really open about that. And in an intake session, the therapist asked what I do for a living, and I told them I'm a game designer. Oh, video games. I'm like, no, I design board games, card games, and role-play games. They're like, oh, so you just get to play around all day. No, it's a job. It's work. Yes, I happen to enjoy the work, but it's really interesting that a lot of people seem to dismiss the amount of work that goes into designing a game, because the ultimate goal is to create something that people enjoy and appreciate. And as a designer, we wouldn't put so much effort into it if there wasn't something we were getting out of it too. But it just it grates on me sometimes when someone, particularly in a professional setting, kind of just dismisses, oh, you're a designer, so it's not a real job. But
did this happen just very recently? Is that why you
yesterday
have to let off the steam?
Just take that chip off your shoulder, and you'll feel better about it. We can be your therapy session for your therapy session whenever they are diminutive about your
inception levels
about your career. Well, for me, I don't know if we've ever done formal introductions around, like, kind of our involvement in game design. I guess we did a couple weeks ago, but I'm a hobby designer, and so I design just because I love it, but I don't have to turn it into a career, which means that if it's not fun, I can just walk away. I can just put it aside. But at the same time, I feel a lot of investment in the things that I'm creating, and the things that I'm working on and helping other people with. And so even then, like, there's definitely a commitment to get things done, to work hard, and it can still feel like work.
I was working with a client that it was broken up into a lot of different segments, and some of them, the very first thing that I designed was approved and it like sailed through. And on another one, it was my 23rd iteration that finally made it through.
Yeah.
And like
It's a lot of work.
after a while, I'm just like, I am sick of this. I would like this to be done, but I have a responsibility to my client.
Yeah.
But I will
know at least.
also agree completely with Dano Corgi saying artists get snubbed like that too. Oh, so you just get to paint or draw all day.
Well, and
Man,
at least
come on,
designers never get asked to do something for exposure either.
for
Like to make
spec.
at least
Yeah,
that's never happened
that's
to me.
Oh,
Uh,
yes, design a game on spec. No, that doesn't work.
or maybe they do. Heather
Yes.
Heather said possibly, but not to me, not yet. I'm not well enough known for people to want to expose me.
Well, and as my friend Nicole Fendi says, people can buy of exposure.
Well put, Nicole. Well
It's a good
put.
way to starve. So, yeah.
All right, so we're talking about action points today. I assume one of the more common game mechanics is that fair to say, Jay?
Well,
Hey there, Joaquin.
man, that's hard to say when we've got over 100,000 entries in Board Game Geek. If we just look at games, action points, particularly in the late 90s, early aughts, when Euro games were first migrating over to the States, we saw a lot of games that had certain mechanics. Tile placement, worker placement, and action points seemed to really hit a lot of the main elements that we would see in those games. But it's still really, really common because it's something that people can easily explain. And as a designer, it's easy to start with that and then kind of move around from there. But first, I think we should talk about exactly what action points are, because even as we were like chatting in Discord, the three of us before this, just to say, does this one fall into this category or not? I could make an argument here.
Yeah.
But is there an official definition from?
I'm sure there are several. I'd love to see what Heather has from our bingo board. Let those kind of be our guidelines for since we're pulling from the bingo for these topics.
Super generic. So that's why it makes it a little bit difficult to feel sure that we're on the right track of what is intended about
Let's
it.
throw it up, and then we can all argue about it afterwards.
Go ahead, Jay.
I was going to say, I would argue that action points are basically a budget of options that you have during your turn. And in the simplest sense, there's usually a 1-to-1 ratio of action points to action. So if I get 3 action points on my turn, I get to do 3 things. And I might have a menu of what those things are: move, draw a card, make an attack, place a worker, whatever it might be. But usually there is a budget of actions and then a menu of different options that you have to choose from. It's a really good point. Dono Cordy in the chat was just saying it's a player agency currency, because the players have complete control, and often you can do them in either order. I think the simplest example, Richard Borg has done a lot of games. So when I first played Siege of the Citadel before the reboot a couple years ago, it was really simple that on your turn, you got to do 2 things. You could attack or you could move. And it didn't matter which order you did them in. But regardless, whenever I would explain the game to people, they would say, so does that mean that I could move and move? Yes, you get 2 actions, you can move and attack. Well, does that mean that I could attack and then move? I'm like, yes. You get 2 things you get to do on your turn, and they have equal weight. Now, in other games, it might be that you can move and you can attack, or for both actions, you can do some other larger thing. So it is a budget, but that doesn't mean, even though in most cases you're going to see a 1-to-1 ratio on action to action point, sometimes an action in game is deemed to be so valuable or so important that it has a larger cost, or if you want to keep doing the same action repeatedly. So maybe the first time you draw a card, it's 1 action point, but if you decide to draw a second card, then it would become 2 action points. There are a lot of different ways that you can scale this, both as a designer and then for players. It gives them a lot of different opportunities to drive and direct their own agency.
They don't really call it this I don't think, in Ticket to Ride, but that makes me think of Ticket to Ride. If you want to pick up a wild card from what you can see, it's both of your card draws. It's like 2 action points.
Yeah.
But if you take
it's interesting there, yeah.
Draw blindly or take things that are just one color, it's just one. You can do that twice. Yeah.
So action points can be the main step of the game. So there's some sort of start phase that everybody might do, then individual players spend their action points, then some cleanup phase at the end. Or action points are just buried somewhere in a long series because you can place trains, fulfill tickets, and do other things in Ticket to Ride too. And that option of drawing either 2 blind or 1 wild for 2, that's kind of in a longer series or sequence that players go through on their turn. So it's interesting too, because I think there are arguments that could be made for whether or not something like that would be considered action points within all the other mechanisms inside Ticket to Ride.
So it sounds like there's a lot of stuff. Go ahead and talk about Library Labyrinth, because I just got to play this the other day, and this definitely leverages action points in an interesting way.
Right. We played this recently, and as we were talking about it, it reminded me that you totally you can do 3 things, I think, on your turn. Everybody can do 3 things, and there's a menu of like 4 possible actions. You could do 2 of them once, and then, or like one of them twice and another one once, or whatever combination you want. It's all like very, very wide open, a cooperative game. And it looks like there are 106 minutes left to back this project, everybody. They reached over 1,000 backers. Super proud of them. What an awesome project. So, and it's a really good example of inclusivity in board games, because it's all about women in history, fictional and true life women that you'd find in books in a library are the characters in this game. So it's a really fun project. But yeah, it is a really good example of action points, and it is a really fun cooperative game that you can play right now for free on ScreenTop.gg.
So just a moment while I pull up Kickstarter in another tab.
Well, while Jay is doing that, let me share what I'm working on here. So I've been taking notes. Let me
make you large.
All right, hold on.
There you go.
There you go. We can see that better. So I'm taking notes like a good student here, and I'm writing down what you guys are saying to try and capture, because it seems like action points are in some of these things are integrated in almost every game we play, right? Like an action is what you do in a game. When you play checkers, you have an action on your turn, but it's simplified. It's a single thing. What can you do? You can move, and then here's the ways that movement can work. And so to define, if I understand these right, some of the unique identifiers of action points are, and these may not be in order. First off, it's giving the player agency, and it's multiple options per turn. So it's not just a single thing. It sounds like for action points to take place, they're usually used where you have choices between the different things you can do, not just move. Usually it sounds like those choices are balanced in some kind of way, so that there's a reason to choose one thing on one turn and one thing on another. It's situationally important, whether you choose to attack or move, to draw new cards or to play cards. And then this is a word that I like that we use a lot in IT, is data chunking. It's a way for you to communicate a lot of different things the player can do in a simplified way. So that the game you were just showing, the library game, is a great example of that. There's a lot of different things you could do on your turn if you just list them all out. It's like 14 different actions you could take, but they chunk it into 3 things. You could move, and here's all the different types of ways you can move. You can draw, and then like another idea. So it seems like action points let you take a whole lot of interesting player choices and simplify them down into a couple equally weighted things they can do, so that you don't get frozen on your turn. How am I doing on notes so far? Do we agree with these?
I'd say for the most part, yeah. And in some games, it does not matter the order in which you spend your action points, because they may not be resolved until after you've spent all of them and then you go through. But in some games, it is going to be very important that order of operations in which you spend your budget. Going back to that move and attack, if there isn't something in line of sight yet, then you can't perform the attack action. So you have to move, get a line of sight, then you can perform the attack action or move again. So sometimes the order is extremely important, and other times you're doing things that are pretty independent. Drawing a card, moving a space, activating a thing on the board, whatever it might be. So that's something else.
So what are some familiar games that our audience have probably played or heard of that use action points, so we can kind of connect the idea to something that they've seen before?
I think one of the best examples that I use when I am introducing people to games is Forbidden Island by Matt Laycock. It's basically a game of an island that is built with tiles and it is slowly sinking. And everybody gets one of several different roles that they play. And on their turn, they can take up to 3 actions. And they've got a handy dandy guide of what those actions are. And you can take any 3 of these actions in any order. But every single character, for example, the engineer in this case, can perform their special action that none of the other players can. So he can shore up 2 tiles instead. So it's really interesting that there's a common menu that everybody can choose from, but in this particular game, everybody also has a specific role that allows them to do something that is unique and special. Now, this is a cooperative game, so it's also different than something that would be competitive, because here people can strategize on the best way to use actions, or maybe, oh, Heather, you don't have to spend 2 actions showing up because I'll do that on my turn. Why don't you spend your action to do something else? And there are different ways to do that. But Forbidden Island, fantastic game. I think it's a great introductory game, but it's also a good game for younger audiences. It's a game that my kids started playing when they were 6. And it's beautiful, got nice big chunky pieces to it, a metal tin. I can't say enough. I think Forbidden Island is an absolutely wonderful game, and you can usually find it for $25 or less. So it's a great value as well.
So that gives me the epiphany that Pandemic is also totally an action point game too, like super famous game that also, you get 4 actions and you need to use them the best. Again, a cooperative game, you need to use the actions you have the best for your special ability and the sequence of play. And it's, both of them have this ticking clock that a catastrophe is going to happen if you're not on top of things, right? They work very similarly. Maybe Pandemic is like you play Forbidden Island, and then Pandemic is the next step.
I was going to say the same thing.
Game, step up.
If you play Forbidden Island, you are very well set up to learn and play Pandemic. Pandemic's probably like half a step more difficult with all the different things going on, but another great example.
So I thought about something else. I'm sorry, go ahead, Heather.
I want to read Dino Corgi's comment here. I think I might. Do we have it all? Let me see. Action points also help expand a player's turn such that more happens in a more efficient way, and you're less likely to have turns where almost nothing happens, like moving a single space and then having to wait for another turn. That's the whole comment.
Think that's for the most part true, because it's up to the player whether or not they want to spend all of their action points. So that's another thing too, is you have a budget and you don't necessarily need to spend your entire budget on your turn. In some games, any unspent actions on this turn will carry forward. So if you want to scrimp a little bit and then have a big splashy turn, in other games though, you get 5 actions this turn, and any actions that you do not take are forfeit for the rest of the round. And
that's a good point.
Turn you will get another 5, etc. So it's interesting, and you have to be aware of that. I'll also say that a lot of video games recently have gone on this action point kind of economy. If anybody is familiar with Slay the Spire and all of those sorts of usually generated roguelite games, you have 3 energy on your turn, and you've got different cards in your hand that cost a different amount of energy. So if you've got 3 cards that cost 1 energy each, you could play all 3 cards. Otherwise, you're trying to pick and choose in which order you're going to play with them. And Monster Train and Roguebook, and there are probably dozens of games like that. But a lot of them that use energy, mana, or something else like that as your budget for the turn. and usually cards then have a different value that you're going to be playing.
Speaking of deck builders, this is another one in the filter because you're talking about deck builders, which is one
Absolutely.
of my favorite genres. I played more Slay the Spire than I should have. I haven't played The Captain is Dead, although I am familiar with it. I know that's a flagship game.
Like the OG Protospiel tested game.
Yeah.
It's from long ago, and it's had several expansions, and has made the rounds at in-person Protospiel way back when. So.
Yeah, but if you do like Slay the Spire, check out Rogue Book and Monster Train. You'll get sucked into those too.
Monster Train is another great. I've got a whole list from a podcast episode I was on of video game deck builders, which are basically deck builders you can play on your own, and they have to put in limitations like action points and things because they will. You can do infinite turns in those games, things that you couldn't do in a physical card game because it would take too much time or be too boring for other players. And so they have to create other limitations or constraints. And it's really interesting what those games do. So speaking of deck builders and action points, one of the OGs, I think probably the OG deck builder, is that fair? I'm not an expert on board game anthology.
Had this thing where everything was included in the box. Like, my understanding is Magic is a deck builder, but it's like you build the deck. It's the first game where it was like the game was building the deck.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The first Magic, really famous one.
In Magic and other TGC's trading card games, you will often draft, and so there's these versions of playing those games where you will sit down and select cards to make your game as you're playing it. And I guess this was the first game to take that drafting experience and make it a standalone game without making you buy cards every single weekend, which is very budget friendly of them, and I appreciate that.
I could talk about Magic the Gathering for hours on end. If you can play and understand Magic the Gathering, you understand the basic concepts of all of game design and the basic concepts of programming.
Yeah.
Conditional statements.
Before I show Dominion, I wanted to call out Joaquin's comment here. Has anyone ever played Feria or familiar with that?
I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's so Feria is a great game because it's a tactical kind of board game sort of video game start with cards, and so it does a really good blend of those. And so when Rogue Book came out, and I noticed that it was in the same setting as Feria, and Richard Garfield, the designer of Magic the Gathering, was one of the contributors. I'm like, I'll get this.
So speaking of deck builders, and this segues into another point I just wrote down on my note sheets here, which is action points let a game scale over time. In games without action points, or especially in older games, you might have what you can do per turn, but that's usually static. You can only do X per turn throughout the game. But with action points, this currency, you can allow players to, like Jay said, save some of those for another turn, or you can enable players to gain more actions throughout the game, which can give a sense of momentum to the game. And Dominion does this pretty well. You start with a default, here's what you can do per your turn. You have one action in the form of an action. You have another action in the form of a purchase or a buy. So players can spend currency from their hand to buy cards. This card costs 4, and they can spend 2, 3, 4 treasure to buy it, and then they can take one action, which is playing any silver card from their hand onto the board. And that's what you start with. But throughout the game, and I'm probably preaching to the choir here, I believe most people are familiar with Dominion, you can buy cards that when you take your action to play them, they give you more actions. And so throughout the game, you can increase the amount of actions. You can increase your budget by purchasing cards to allow you to create more of a budget, which is a form of engine building, which is a whole nother thing we're not really getting into today. But that's, I think, an interesting attribute of actions is that they allow you to invest in being able to do more on future turns. They give you a sort of investment that you can do throughout the game, which is, I think, interesting. It's fun. It makes you feel like you're creating something. And it also allows players to just have to make the decision of when do I stop investing in my ability to have better turns, and when do I start spending resources on just winning the game, which might be a completely different objective.
Yeah, and Michael might be building an engine where he's getting more action, so he's actually able to accomplish more things of smaller scale on the turn, where I might have a strategy where I don't want as many actions, but I'm selecting from a different set. So
You're making your
usually
actions better.
Yeah, in a lot of deck builders in particular, and a lot of others, you'll see an increase over time where it escalates. So often you've got very, very quick, easy to perform and resolve turns and rounds at the beginning of the game. It's a little bit longer. Hearthstone is an example of a online collectible card game that you build, but turn one, both players get 1 mana. Turn two, you get 2 mana. Then 3, then 4. So that really helps build. Like, it's rare that it's ever going to go beyond 10 or so rounds, and there's a sense of excitement as you know that you can do of small things on your turn, or you can play that big card, get that big special effect, and that while it's not escalating, have a huge menu. I don't know if you had that image, Heather, from Tikal, but there's a game from Wolfgang Kramer from 1999 called Tikal, which is about building these pyramids in the jungle. And I've mentioned having a menu of actions before, and Tikal literal menu where there is a player reference right here. You have a total of 10 action points on your turn, which can seem overwhelming at the beginning, especially the first time you play. But in the right column, you'll see the number of red pips there indicates how many actions it takes to perform. So if you perform that action on the very, very bottom, which is ascending the pyramid, that's going to take half of your budget. Or you can, I don't remember what all of these different glyphs and icons mean, but like a very
establishing a camp looks like that.
Yep.
The other 5 one.
Clearly, that is digging a square, which is something we all know what that means.
Token for so you can do the order. Somebody might only do 2 things on their turn, or could do individual things that are all very small solve on their turn. But Tikal was the first game that came to mind when you mentioned doing action points as an episode, just because it is such a huge combination. Like, I don't know combinatorial how many different ways down, but there are many different ways that a turn could be resolved.
Yeah, I played this once at a board game meetup, and I guess like this kind of thing is not very common. There might be a reason for that, because it does kind of create AP, I think, when you have to, and also you don't have physical tokens in this game, as I recall, to count your actions. I think I saw like a picture on BGG of like, I made my own abacus to keep track of my action points. Because it's like, well, okay, I want to do this, and then there's just a lot of like head math.
It can be paralyzing. I'm trying to remember how Caverna does it, which is the more, it's not more complicated, it's a more streamlined, but more parts and pieces follow up to Agricola. I think I'm saying that right. And I remember that, among other things, the game has the basic actions you can take in your turn, but you can also purchase little tiles similar to this board you're showing, but they're usually simpler. And those tiles give you new actions you can take. So it's those asymmetric actions like Jay was talking about in his, what was that called? Island of Mystery, something like that?
Forbidden Island?
Forbidden Island.
Wow.
Thank you.
You haven't played that one, huh?
No. You guys would be amazed how many games I have not played for being as passionate about board games as I am.
Yeah, somebody with kids.
Sure,
that's a good one for you to keep an eye out for.
I'm putting it on the list. But anyway, that's a fun thing you can do, is you can let players buy those asymmetric powers that only they can take this action. And that can be really rewarding, because you can see that from the shop, the menu, and you can think, oh man, I really want to be able to do this thing that no one else can do. That sounds really fun. I'm going to take my time to get that action. And now I feel like a superhero because I can do this thing no one else can do. And it's
Okay.
even if you don't win the game, I think that can be really rewarding that you had this goal to get this thing to do something and make you as a player special. So I like it when games implement that. I played a game, the Refugee Search for Hope game by Angel, who I don't think is in chat but has been here before. His game,
Another cooperative game.
another cooperative game. I think actions work really well in cooperative games because you can give different roles and let everyone help. And in that game, if I remember right, Angel, hopefully I remember this correctly, you can get special actions. I think they're temporary. I'm trying to remember, but there's a set of 6 tiles, and you can earn certain tiles by, I think, building a certain structure, a library maybe, and it gives the team access to new actions. So it's a sense of progression throughout the game, but it's also optional progression. You could beat the game without using any of them, but if you choose to invest in building libraries, then now you've got these new ways to help yourself. You've got new, better actions to choose from, and I think that's a lot of fun.
I think one of my favorite games shows that action points can be unique and novel every game. So you don't even know what actions are going to be available to you until you start playing and developing it. Tied with worker placement, and then for me, the best example of that is Lords of Waterdeep. If people have ever played or seen this, everybody is essentially a clan in Waterdeep in the Dungeons and Dragons setting. And you have a certain number of workers that you're going to be placing on the board, and the board represents different structures, the inn, the merchant shop, the fighters guild, things like that. And each location has a different action when you perform it. And some of the locations have restrictions on how many meeples can be assigned there. So the actions can also be mutually exclusive. Once I perform this action, I will not get access to it again. And maybe it's not the action I want to take most strongly, but it's an action I don't want Heather to take. So sometimes there's hate playing, or hate drafting, when you take an action not because you want to, but because you want to deny somebody else the opportunity.
I like to just call that strategic thinking. It's not hate. Is worker placement a subset of action points then?
It depends on how many workers you get, I think. Like in Lords of Waterdeep, you have a larger budget, where in Carcassonne you're placing a tile, then you have the option to place a meeple, but it's not tied or associated budget-wise like it is otherwise. It's like a secondary step to placing a tile. So it's not always, but in Lords of Waterdeep, your meeples are kind of your pool of action, and you can see how many actions you have remaining because your pool of meeples keeps shrinking as you place them around the board.
It's unfortunately been a while since I played this one, so I'm blanking a little bit on what it's like, but it's kind of like a very small box worker placement thing. You're building, this is kind of what the board setup looks like, shown on the back here. And you're placing your farmer. You're moving your farmer around this. You have 2 farmers, and you're moving them around this grid. There's like 2 action spaces on each card. And there's rules about sometimes you can go where another farmer is and sometimes you can't, like you're saying with worker placement. But yeah, this is not a very well-known game. I got it just kind of randomly from buying it used from somebody, and remember just going, this is I've only played it 2-player with Will, but this is like a really pleasant, I like the decision space in that game. So
it sounds really fun.
I'll give it a call.
Is it time for us to play a game?
Yeah, sure. I don't know. Well, so we haven't gotten the rules to this game tied in very well, or dialed in very well. How do we want to run the Boardgamizer thing? You want to not look until I show it to you and just have...
I haven't seen anything yet. So.
I didn't cheat this week. Before we move on to that, I just want to give a shout out to Chaos in the Old World, one of my favorite games of all time by Eric Lang. Also uses action points. You've got so much power that you can spend on cards, on summoning, on moving around the board. But Chaos in the Old World, it's a little bit harder to find, but if you have the opportunity, it is a fantastic game. One of Eric Lang's, I think, best games, and certainly went on to influence a lot of his other games down the road, like Rage and so many others.
Thursday afternoons are going to become very expensive for me.
I've heard the name
take
of
all
this,
of these. Mm-hmm.
but I don't know much about how it plays. I guess it's looking very area control-ish to me.
Yes.
Is that true?
It's area control with very, very few spaces to control.
Okay.
So, and every character has different abilities and powers, and it's a set turn order, which is one of the few games where the players have to act this particular order, which influences a lot of play. But anyway, fantastic game. Just wanted to give that a plug. I love it.
Precursor to Blood Rage?
Yep. And several of his other more recent games.
So do you two want to design a game together with the Boardgamizer option?
I'm game for that. Yeah, let's try it.
So this
let's
is a
go in blind
design partnership. And yep, this one's coming to Kickstarter next year, everybody. All right, so what we've got is action points were set. I did something to set those, and then you can either do a Vegas theme or a Frankenstein theme.
Okay.
The victory condition is you have to have the most votes, and there's no board.
All right.
No board.
So the first thing that comes to me, does anything pop into your mind, Michael?
I am picturing movie monsters in a casino.
I am picturing slot machines, and every time you pull a lever, you are spending an action point. So you can spend one action point on the low payout slot machines or more action points on the high payout ones. And when you get a string of cherries or things like that, instead of cherries, they are arms, legs, head, torso, and things like that. So
and you're trying to, and you're trying to use these things to build some kind of movie monster. And then the person that makes and then everyone votes on the movie monsters that the different players have made, and the one with the most votes wins.
Right. And you know, it could be that any spare parts that you have left that you don't use are counted against your score, or maybe they count as votes. If we're all playing rather than somebody playing and everybody else voting, there are a lot of games where it's fun and they find out a way to equally allow everybody to judge without seeing what everyone's doing, so that there's not the confirmation bias of, oh, well, Heather already voted for Michael, so I might as well vote for Michael as well.
I like that idea a lot. And I like the idea that you have to use what you land on, so that you have to be creative with the whatever parts, pieces, body bits that you roll in the slot machine. I also think it would be fun if there's a way to take to pass a slot machine payout to the next player. So like if you get a three-eyed tentacle and you don't know what to do with it, you can pass that to the next person, and they have to find a way to fit that onto their monster and still make it make cohesive sense.
That could work. Or the different body parts all do different things. So if you get a head and it's a smart head, maybe that gives you one extra action on each turn. And having legs lets you move back and forth between the slot machines quicker. Or more easily, or arms are what let you interact directly with the other people to steal apart the piece that they have or one of their actions or things like that. So I could see a lot of fun around that. But I also just like the thought of this like stitched together hoodoo style slot machine that you're pulling, and everything's out. You get a line across of heads, and so one of the heads tumbles down.
And you just have to your monster already has two heads. You just have to affix that to the stomach and try and make that work. I'd really like to see what the voting looks like, and if people are voting for the funniest thing or the most practical or the cleverest, because usually voting games hinge around a certain feeling they're trying to evoke. Like if it's a Jack in the Box party game, it's usually the cleverest, funniest, the thing that evokes the most surprise or ingenuity, versus a really bad art game is the thing that looks the most terrible. So
You have a deck
Yeah.
of cards, and at the beginning, you shuffle those up, and that's like the first slot machine that gets pulled, per se, or the roulette wheel. You flip
Uh-huh.
that over, and that tells you what it's being voted on. The monster most likely to win a dance party. The monster most likely to scare kids at Halloween. The monster most
Uh-huh.
likely to succeed on a blind date. Whatever it might be, right? Like you can put some really, really silly things in there.
Yeah, mash up the criteria. And
Yep.
we didn't touch on it directly, but we have made this without a board, I believe. We're using
Correct.
cards.
Correct.
Are you drawing on a notepad the thing you've created, or are you arranging cards of body parts so that they
I think it's pocket.
are overlaying? A plastic thing that you like a Mr. Potato Head style
Ooh,
bits
we
and
could get
pieces?
clay. It could be like
Actual
cranium
molding clay.
molding clay.
I would love to see physically constructive things that you could like set down and here is my creation. God help me for what I have made.
Was back in college, and it was called Clay Wars, and it was basically you make a creature out of clay, and depending on how you built it, determine your attributes, and you move around. And if I attack Michael and I end up severing his chainsaw arm, I get to stick it onto my monster. And I love being able to play with clay. God, that was fun.
This was really fun too. I want to do this again. That was a lot of fun running that out. I feel like we nailed something down.
And that's something that we could do on like index cards as a prototype, and put something together and just see if it works.
My question is, like you're saying, we're pulling slot machines. I think of that as, you know, you either get something useful or you don't get something useful. So are you picturing it as like the good pile and the good pile costs more to go to, that the not so good pile costs less, but you draw like 3 cards from the good pile, and if they're a set, then you're good. If they're not, you get nothing. Or what are you thinking?
I really like is allowing people to always draw more cards and then choose from a subset. So if my slot machine result is really, really poor, maybe I draw 3 cards from the poor pile, but I get to keep one and discard the other 2. Whereas if I get a winning streak, which is really, really good, then I get to draw from the premium pile, and I only draw 2, but I get to keep 1. So there are ways to be able to organize that. Or I also like games that allow you to push failure forward. So if I pull on the slot machine and I don't like the result, I might choose not to draft anything. On my next turn, I get a +1 bonus, or I get to draw an additional card, or I get something else by deferring a reward now in hopes of a greater reward later.
I like this.
Are you picturing what is on the card for the slot machine? Is it like a leg, or is it like 2 legs and a head? What are you?
Man, so I don't have my whiteboard close to me right now, but I see a card that is vertical that has 3 lines across it, and on the top is a head or body part, and you deal 3 of them out next to each other. So you're going to get the lines either going across, down, or the diagonals like you do on the more advanced slot machines. And if you don't like what you got dealt, you could pay an action point to replace one of those cards. And maybe everybody is working off of the same outcome. Maybe everybody is shuffling and dealing over others. So you could have basically one deck that is just roulette results. Yeah, so if you just make that into 3 sections on top.
Like this?
Yeah. And you just lay 3 of those next to each other randomly. So you might get a row of 3 of a kind on a diagonal or straight across. And with only like 4 or 5 categories, you've got a pretty good chance of being able to get something out of it. And if you don't get a complete match, then next turn you get to pull the lever again, which allows you to place over one of those, things like that. But I think there's a lot of ways to be able to, with just 3 cards with 3 pieces of information, you've got 5 main ways of slot machine resolution. Your horizontal lines and your 2 vertical, or your 2 diagonals. So.
All right, Jay. So you're bringing this approach to online, right?
I really kind of want to play this now.
Yes.
Me
really
too.
fun.
But I kind of have other things in my life.
I know there's other things to design. This is going to be a recurring problem for you. We're going to give you weekly great ideas, or you're going to give us weekly great ideas, and then you're not going to have enough brain space to make them.
So
Maybe our chat can help run away with some of these ideas and bring them to reality for us.
Right. Maybe so.
Speaking of which, is it time for me to let chat ask a question?
Sure. Yes, and learning a little bit more about how the chat features work on Twitch. I'm over here trying to be logged in as myself, and it's given me all these blockers about I need to be verified. So I don't know. Slowly but surely, I'm going to figure out how to learn what it looks like to y'all. But I know that I set up something you can use your channel points for. So just kind of giving you a little tour of what you see there, what you should see there on the chat. You've got your emoji. If you're subscribed, you can use our special channel emojis. I've put a couple in there, starting to learn what to make for you, and I'm interested in your suggestions of what kind of emojis you want, and we can make more stuff. And then there's something below the chat that looks like a little Pokeball almost, and those are your channel points. Yep. We've got you can't see it in Restream, but Joachim is having fun with his emojis that are available.
And I'm going to use those to let you guys vote on questions as well, per Heather's suggestion.
Use the free ones though. Don't use ours, so that people don't have to be subscribed to participate. I think.
Oh no. Okay.
I think there's free ones. There's some called Yay Nay, or like. If you've got like 4 different options, I'm not sure which ones you should use.
So there's global. I gotta think about that.
Or just,
or require people to be subscribed.
No, I don't want to do that
for right now.
Yeah. So what is free and available to everyone? I'll have to figure that out.
The alphanumeric keyboard.
Yes.
But that's not fun. That's not fun.
But it's efficient. You're prototyping this.
Yeah. All right. So I agree. This is the prototype version. So I'm going to change these icons into just A, B, and C for now. But we are going to have these as custom things for the next question.
What I could do is I know what I can do. I can make it so you can use your channel points, which are free, just from spending time watching. For vote A, vote B, vote C, vote D. If you are always going to have 4, and make them cheap. But right now, y'all can see if you click on your channel points, you can see the things that you can pay your freebie channel points to make us do. I have some very boilerplate sort of things in there just to test it out for now, but things like hydrate, etc. So
how do people do that? You click on that's cheering.
Okay.
Points.
Or they could just type it into the
I
chat.
see what you're trying to do. These are I gotcha. There we go. I gotcha. You were confusing me a little bit, Michael, but I got it. You've got three options. Yep. Okay. So the people who are in chat, and when there's not enough of you, one of you will say A and B, and then we're just going to have...
I will give it to the first person to answer if it's a tie.
Okay, there you go. That's
so what question do you want us to answer today? Question A, what is a game mechanic you enjoy and why? We'll exclude the one we just talked about. Question B, what time do you usually get up in the morning? And if there's enough time, you can give context around that. And question C, what is your most played song for this year's playlist?
Oh, wow.
So Joaquin has given us question A, and unless that gets outvoted, I think we're going to go with A. I'll give you guys another 10 seconds to weigh in there.
Yeah, it's not a lot of people to come in behind you, Joachim, so you're probably going to win.
We're going to go with A. And so with the question, what does the game mechanic enjoy and why? Joaquin, how long do you want us to have to answer that for? For 60 seconds or for 5 seconds? And I'm not sure which is harder. I think the 5 second we've decided would be the harder answer.
How about 30 seconds?
We'll give people more options.
There we go. 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
So let's just convert that
That's
to
what we've just done for you. We've just given you 50 minutes.
Let's just change minutes to seconds there.
60 seconds. All right, take it away. I'm going to hand it off to you two. I'll let you both answer. I think last time I let Heather go first. So Jay, I'll hand it to Jay. I'll pass it to you. Timer, right?
Can you do the timer for us?
Yes,
hopefully next week we'll have a more beautiful solution, but we're still working on it.
I've got this. This is beautiful. This is don't demean my my 60-second timer here. All right, so swapping camera.
Okay.
All right, 60 seconds on the clock. Going to Jay first. What's your favorite game mechanic and why? 3, 2, 1, go.
All right, so one of the mechanics that I like is specifically integrated into the game Village Pillage. It is a simultaneous selection, placement, and reveal. And what's interesting about that is you've got a series of characters in your hand, and different characters act in a very, very specific sequence. So we're simultaneously selecting characters from our hand, and we are always interacting with the people directly to our left and directly to our right. So in this game, I would be placing a character between myself and Michael and between myself and Heather. They'd be doing the same thing. Then after we've selected them, we reveal them, and however they interact, like if Michael played a rogue and I played a farmer, farmers gain resources at the beginning of the turn, and then rogues act immediately afterward to steal resources. But if I had selected a guard and Michael had selected a rogue, well, guards are there to catch rogues. So there's a lot of this mind game going on. Love it, love it. It's a great game.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Resetting the timer. Heather, over to you in 3, 2, 1, go.
The one that comes to mind first for me is just set collection because it plays into my collector nature. I have lots of different collections, and there's something just very satisfying in real life and in games. I guess in a game, I buy one game and I get to collect within that game instead of spending a lot of money buying a lot of different things. But probably my most quirky, noticeable collection in my life is Disney Christmas ornaments. I have 2 Christmas trees full of only Disney character Christmas ornaments of all variety from all different places like Hallmark, and some of them from Disney World and Disneyland. And that collection was started for me by my aunt when I was a kid. There was like a Grolier collection that she started me subscribed on, and then we transitioned into Hallmark. So I get more of those every year. So people know what to get me for Christmas, I suppose. But yeah, do that a lot. Doing that in games is much cheaper, so I like it.
I like that too.
Collection.
Yeah. All right.
The back to Village Pillage, I think.
I'm just gonna really quickly say it's order of operations, outwitting your opponent, but there is a rock, paper, scissors sequence of events. This acts, this acts, this acts. These particular characters act in a very particular way. But it's one of my favorite games and the #1 game that I use in the classroom to teach students.
Interesting. Why is that? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
It is very easy to teach. There's a fantastic video on YouTube that I found that's only 2.5 minutes long that teaches the entire game. It teaches them about order of operations, which is one of the most important things in the early levels of game design. Whether they're doing art or whether they're doing programming, they need to understand a workflow or an order of operations and how that affects things. And then also, because each of these cards are represent a character in your village, one of the first design assignments is to design some characters for the game. And we'll just sleeve them and shuffle them in, and we'll see how they work. What's great is you can tell almost right away whether or not that character works within that set or not, whether it's broken, whether it should be in one of the different stages, whether it just needs a little tweak in one of its numbers. But it's a really fun game, easy to teach, fun to play, lots of interaction. And a huge number of my students end up buying copies usually by the end of the semester.
I have another game added to my list.
Village Pillage by Jelly Bean Games.
I think I've played that only as a 2-player game, and it sounds like it's probably much more interesting.
It's
when you're playing it
fantastic with four.
with
Oh.
more people. Is the sense I get as you
Yes.
describe it. Anyway.
All right. What is
Okay.
next? Are you answering this question as well, Michael, or are you the timer?
I can go either way. We're still feeling out if this is like to one person, to everyone.
All right, then you got 60 seconds.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
we're trying to fill time here, so I'll put in an answer too. Here, let me put my timer back on the clock.
Cool.
And I'll go. I wasn't preparing to answer this question, so I'm ironically the least prepared to do so. But this is good because this is you guys getting to know us better. And I don't think it's my absolute favorite mechanic because I've really only recently started thinking about games as their mechanics, and I used to just think about them as games. But I enjoy real-time games, which is something that I find a lot of people do not.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wouldn't call it my favorite, but it's one of the most entertaining, and it's one that it's a mechanic that I see a lot with family and friends that always brings a crowd to the table. Whether you're playing something as simple as spoons or something a little bit more involved like Dutch Blitz, or there's a game about bidding that I can't think of the name of that's discontinued that we play whenever we have family gatherings. I love the absurdity and the noise and the fun panic that real-time games can bring. I know that they bring stress and it's not for everyone, but I get a kick out of it.
One of my favorite real-time games is Fightball by James Ernest at Cheap Ass Games. Basically, there are different decks that represent different teams, and we have this virtual court that we're playing on, and we have to place cards as quickly as we can. And it has to start with a player and a shot. And so you're like building a stack, and to be able to score, you need 3 cards played in a very specific order. So if Michael wants to block one of my shots, he plays one of his cards on my stack. And now I've got to start over again. And so after we go through our deck and have placed as many cards as we can out on the table, the half is over, and then we count to see which stacks are legal and which stacks aren't. And the stacks that ended up being legal, where you start with the position on the board, the player, and the shot, those score, and anything else that's out of sequence doesn't. And I got so good at it that eventually nobody in my game group would play it with me anymore.
That's one of the problems with real-time games is they do lend themselves to the same winner and over if someone has a certain skill at that game. But one of the things I like about them is that they force me out of my comfort zone. Like many gamers that I've met and talked to in the design space, a lot of us are very careful, analytic thinkers. Not all of us. We all have different strengths for sure, but that's a common trait I've seen is like thoughtful, analytical. What are all the branching outcomes? In real time, just slaps you right out of that mentality and says, make a decision now. And if it wasn't the best one, too bad. It's time to make another decision. And so it forces me into a different place. And it also puts me on even footing with a lot of my family who approach games in a different way and will never beat me in a game of Dominion. We demonstrated this over 15 games over the early pandemic, but every single one of them has an equal shot to beat me at the bidding game, which I gotta find the name of. I think it's called like Panic at Wall Street or something like that. It's a fantastic asymmetric real-time bidding game, and it's wild. We love it.
I like real-time games because I am much better when I get to rely on my gut and my immediate reaction rather than long-term planning and like 2-3 turns ahead. I can't do that. But real-time games tend to be very, very ableist, so they are kind of only accessible to a subset of the player community.
For sure.
So
and that's a real limitation. I would like to design real-time games that got around that and intentionally were more inclusive, maybe being less physical and more cognitive. I think there's an opportunity for that, to share that type of game with a different audience or a broader audience, because they can be, what was the term you used? I've never heard that in game design. Ableist?
Yeah. So go ahead.
What is a hand game, Joachim? What does that mean? Do you mean card game? Oh, a hand game like you use your hands.
Yes, like you mean like rock, paper, scissors, like a game with no components, and it's all you can just bust it out anywhere. Yeah, I played a game with I know we're out of time here. I played a game with a group of kids once where we were doing the Christmas tree. Is that the Christmas tree?
Yeah, these are the. Is it blurry? Can I get it unblurry?
Yeah, the camera's not focusing on it.
There we go.
There it
go.
is.
That's a better focal length.
These are all of them that I got for 2020 Christmas. There's some that they're precious moments stylized that I specifically collect. And real quick, this was like my very first one. Mickey.
Aww.
This is that Girl Your Collection thing I'm talking about. So that one I've had since I was like 8 years old.
Joaquin wants to see the whole thing.
You
have to pay channel points for that kind of access.
Yeah, then bits. Only actual money.
I painted walnuts as Santa Clauses and cinnamon sticks as reindeer, and I would then attach a little ribbon for hanging those. And all throughout grade school, I made those every year to send out to relatives, and then some of them would buy them actually to be able to send out as gifts. But they're really, really cool when you use a cinnamon stick as an ornament. Then you get that pine and cinnamon
delicious.
smell in there. Oh yeah.
Oh, send it on Discord. Okay, I'll put some stuff in Clubhouse. Yeah, a little later on. Yeah.
You have to join the Protospiel community to see them.
Right. Yes, it's I think it would be a little bit spammy for me to put the entire collection.
It's a tier 2 privilege that you get when you
Patreon subscribers only.
Yeah, maybe I can make a slide one day.
Well, it's really good talking to you both.
Yeah, you too.
This has been a really fun topic.
Yeah, I was a little nervous about it because I feel like it's a little nebulous, but it was a good talk.
And
we found our way around.
And it's used in so many ways. But that's what we think about action points and other things.
On to a new topic next week. You want to plug it? What are we talking about next week, Heather?
2-player games, and I think you won't be joining us, right, Michael? Because you're going to be on vacation.
Appropriately, yes. It'll be just the two of you talking about 2-player games. So I will not be here next week.
I guess we have to decide if we want to have strict rules that they're 2-player only games or just games that work well at 2 players. But I could, because Will is my primary board game buddy, we focus a lot, especially early in our time before we had board game friends, we focused a lot on games that could be played, worked well, only played at 2 players. So I have a pretty long list personally.
my vote would be designed with 2 players and specifically in mind, because hopefully I can pop in and watch you guys at least. And I think that's narrow enough. That's an interesting space.
All right.
All right. I will talk to you guys later.
Everybody have a great week. We'll see you next week.
Au revoir.
Bye.